Okay, I just realized something's funny. I was missing this part over here. Cloth. Alright, so I'm going to rotate the canvas horizontal so I can get fresh eyes on this picture. I've been looking at it too long one way. Gotta look at it the other way now. Okay, I'm going to turn up the fog a bit. And I'll actually go to the background and create a new layer underneath that shadow layer. Select the fog color and then make a gradient of the fog color coming up from the water. And I have the soft round set to 30% opacity. It'll make more sense once the shadows are on the character. I'm going to make a new layer on the water layer. And do the same thing from the background to the foreground. And then I'm going to select the shadow from the top and bring that in to the water as well, but in the foreground. Because it's reflecting the sky. And if it's dark like that, then it's going to reflect that. Alright, now let's move into the rest of the image. I'm going to have to start laying in the colors for everything else. So I want the tree to at least be two-toned. So, same thing. Attach a layer to it. And I'm going to select a different brush for this. I don't want to have it be the same brush everywhere. So I'm going to use something a little like chunkier for it. And I use this brush here. I'll show you. It looks like this. It's kind of just like a thick paintbrush looking thing to make it look like I did some work with a real brush. So I'm going to select the tree, and then I'm just going to kind of like stripe it like as if it were like a birch tree. So I'm going to raise the color up a little bit. So I select the color. I'm going to go up and a little desaturated. And then I'm just going to start working it in. And I think that might be even a little too much. It'd be a little more subtle than that. So let's try it again. Yeah, just a little bit. See how this looks. Yeah, that's better. So I'm just going to wrap it around the form the same way I was doing with the lines. I'm only really going to start giving dimension to everything once I bring in the shadows, so it's got to be patient till then. It's just getting the tones and colors ready so that everything else looks good. Because it doesn't look like much until you do that. I'm going to do the same thing to the grass down here. The grass she's standing on. So layer, new layer. So I select the base color and I'm going to drag it down a little bit into the green. It's just a little darker. So I'm doing the rock color right now. I'm going to erase out all the parts where the green shows through, the little mossy parts on the rock that I like. I don't think the green for the grass is actually green enough, so I'm going to adjust that to a more rich color. And then I'm going to adjust the rock layer as well. I actually kind of like that, making it dark. And then I can do that to the rock as well. Something like that. Turn the opacity down on that background. I don't want it to go too dark. I don't want it to go dark to the point where the focal doesn't read as well when I drop the shadow on it, because make it the shadow might make it to the point where it's like competing with the focal. Alright, so now I am ready to add the shadow to the character. So I'm going to use that brush again. So this is fairly simple. I go to the witch layer again. I just click anywhere in these, and then I do the new layer, so it creates one on top of the previous, and then I drag it to the top of all the connected ones, and then I change it to a multiply layer. And now I'm going to select a background tone and see what that looks like when I paint it on. And it's a little too dark for what I want right now. So I'm going to take the background tone and brighten it up a little bit. And by background tone, I mean like the lightest part of the background I'll take, and I'll use that as like a wash, which is what the multiply layer does. So I'll select the fog and then bump that up a bit, because I don't want the shadow to be too intense on the character. So now I'm going to zoom in and start rendering the light. So to me, the light is coming from right up above. So that's a little too bright. Bring it down. See how that looks? Yeah, that's better. Okay, so the light is coming from directly above. So the lip is jutting out, so it's not going to be getting hit by the light. Inside of the mouth. Be getting any light. Maybe the gums are a little bit, and the teeth a little bit. So now I'm doing the bottom sides of the coins. I actually think this shadow might be a little too dark, just so that I can see what's underneath a little better. So I'm going to brighten it up. Make it a normal layer so I can tell the color. Alright. So again, I'm thinking in the same terms of how I did the line width. I think of where the light's hitting, and then I put the shadow on the sides that are facing away. And that's all I'm really thinking about. And if you need to look at light on a model, I would suggest something that helped me a lot was actually doing Sculpey models of the characters that you're working on. Sculpey's kind of expensive, but just like any kind of clay model that you can get and then just drop a light on it, it helps you think through a lot of problems that you might have dropping lighting on a character. I used to do that for some of the portraits I have online that I've done when I was doing the full paintings. I also keep the shadow light like this so that you can still see the line work underneath. I don't want to like totally overpower what I did. I still want the character to show through, the design and everything. But this is an example of what I would do if I were working on like a video game. So that you could still get a good read on everything, but it was defined in the forms so that you could also look at that and be able to figure out how skinny the character is and get a grasp of the forms. So the arm is going to be casting a shadow on the leg because it's directly above. If you can do things like that, it automatically creates like a sense of space. Same thing with the draping cloth there and the shoulder. And again, that helps to study models and things to get a better idea of that. Not that you need to make a perfect model. Everything that I ever made for my stuff was a super crude, just a couple minutes, basic shapes. It goes a long way in helping you though. Even the simplest model with light on it goes a long way. You'd be surprised. So this kind of like, pulls everything together. This part of it, the tutorial, once you get to this stage and you've planned out your character, then rendering, and even if this were just the first part of a painting, like it's already coming together and it was only lines. So it's nice to have this kind of framework in place. It speeds up the process more than you'd think, and you get more definition in what you're doing. Like people can look at your idea and see it right there, and everything's defined, and you figured it all out. So now I'm going to do that same thing without changing the color I'm using right now for the shadow on every other piece. So I'm going to go over to the tree, create a new layer, put it on top, multiply layer, and then just start brushing it in. And you can make like there's a spotlight above her or something. So not all of the tree is getting hit with the light, because if I hit every single part of the tree with the light, it would take away from the focus. I'm also realizing right now that I might want to go a little darker with the shadow on the tree. Let's darken the shadow on the tree there. It might just be that the background needs to be darker like it was. So I had turned the opacity down on this gradient layer. I'm going to turn that back up and see what it does. Yeah, that's a little better. I think it was a little premature for me to shut that off. So now I'm going to go to the cloud color layer, and I'm going to do the same thing. Layer, new layer, use previous layer's clipping mask, and I can turn the mode here to multiply instead of doing it over here. So I'm going to take the same color I've been using and brush it in on the fog. So this creates that uniform color throughout the whole picture, so nothing feels out of place. I'm not mixing colors, I'm not introducing anything different. It's just the color from the background made slightly lighter maybe slightly desaturated, but it's pretty much the same thing. And everything starts to fit together now. So time to go down to the grass and do the same thing. To multiply, not changing the color again. Do the cast shadow because she's sitting on this ledge. Her knee's going to be casting a shadow, her leg, pretty much everything. So most of this is in shadow. And over here, and the little seaweed parts, which I don't really like anymore, so I'm going to adjust those. They're kind of just there. I do the layer, new layer, group with previous, multiply. Okay, and now for the water layer. Create a new layer on top of all the other ones. This is multiply. Everything underwater, going straight across here. And then I'm going to just do shadow here for the rest. So her leg was going in right there, and the rest of her leg was just casting a shadow on the water. It's going to be a little ripply, so. And then cast a little bit of a shadow from above. And the rest of her body's kind of hanging out over the water as well. And then I'm just drawing around the ripples and underneath the lily pads. And now I'm going to do a layer on top of the multiply on the witch. Select the water and put that on top of the foot all the way to the point where it's going into the water. And then I'm going to turn the opacity down on it so it looks like it's just underwater a little bit. So that's pretty much it for the base tones of this whole thing. And then I'm going to move into doing all of the adjustments and then little after effects, and I'll probably be able to call it done after adding some texture to it. And that'll be pretty much it. Okay, on to final adjustments. So this is all I do now is go section by section and pump stuff forward, move stuff back, but everything's in place and it's ready to go. So I'm going to adjust the multiply layer on the witch. Same thing, hue saturation, make it down a little bit. Make that a little better. And then on top of this one, I'll make another layer, but this time I'm going to use an adjustment layer. So that's this little circle, half circle. I'm going to go to color balance and just adjust the colors here. Up the reds and the yellows and the shadows. Some yellow to the shadow, maybe some blue. Probably more blue. Something like that. And then the highlights. More of the yellow maybe. So I added that and it kind of took away the saturation a bit. So I'm going to reapply that now. Just up the saturation of this image. So that kind of gave it a little bit of a boost back to where it was. If I turn these two off, it'll just go back to that. So now I'm going to use the levels layer, up the darkness of this, and the brightness on the opposite side, these two sliders. So without them, she kind of blends into the background, and with them, she pops a little bit. Then I'm going to use a selective color layer. Select the neutrals, which is just like the grays and general colors. Because you can get very selective with this, as it implies. You can go and adjust simply the blue or the gold or whatever. It's pretty easy. Like I can go to yellows and it'll select only the yellows. Brightness and contrast, adjust that. So went from this to this, which I kind of don't like how dark the mouth is now. So I'm actually just going to go to the mouth layer here and make it a little brighter, because I like the rest of the adjustments. It's just the mouth is a little too dark. And I think the shadow should be slightly darker. So I'm going to go to color balance to adjust it. Okay, and I think the fog should be a little brighter. It's falling behind a little bit. So I'm going to adjust that. And overall, I think everything in the background should be darker. So what I'm going to do is create an adjustment layer just below the witch's color layer. And this won't be attached to anything else. So I'm going to use a selective color layer, adjust the neutral tones. I'm going to use a color balance and adjust the shadows. Go a little darker with the reds and maybe the blues. I don't want it to feel too warm in the swamp, so I don't want to introduce too much of a red color. And I want to darken, actually if I duplicate her shadow layer, I can erase out the parts where it doesn't hit the light. So I can do a little bit of a gradient here. Maybe this will work. Turn the actual layer opacity down to about 50%. So what I did was I took the multiply layer that I had and I duplicated that layer, and then I brought it into what it does actually when I duplicate it in this like little connected area is it bumps the rest of the stuff that's above it out of the connection. So like I'll just do it again. So if I duplicate this, it pushes everything else out and that affects the rest of the image. So I have to go and select those layers and drag them back into the middle so that they're affecting it. But so I did that. I duplicated the multiply layer, and then using a gradient I erased away from this center point. So let me show you what I did. So this right here is where light's being hit. Where light's hitting the skin here. And right here I want it to be the darkest along the edge. And then I'm thinking that light would be hitting the leg here and bouncing up because it reflects off of skin. So I'm thinking that the light would bounce up and it would hit here. So this would be the darkest part of her body, where the shadow just begins, where everything else would get hit with reflected light. So in order to make the shadow a bit more convincing, I duplicated the multiply layer to make it a little darker along the edge here, and then erased out using a 30% opacity soft round brush to make it look like light was bouncing up, but this was still darker up here. I feel like the eyes look a bit strange, so I might try and, yeah, I'm going to add a little bit of a multiply to them on the shadow layer. I'm just drawing on top. Erase out. Maybe select the color and then do it on top. I'm thinking that secondary color on the tree behind her is a bit too bright, maybe. So I'm going to adjust that a little bit. Not like that, not like a cheetah print. I guess it's okay. Okay, so now that I'm liking the general feel of the whole picture, I'm going to do an overall adjustment. So above every other layer that's on this, I'm going to start making adjustment layers. So I'm going to go to photo filter for my first one and play around with this. See what I can get for something kind of cool looking. Because the photo layers kind of unify the colors as well, but I don't want them to be too intense if I do end up using one. So I'll turn it to like 6%, so it just adds a little bit of that cool color. And I don't know if I like that, but it's worth trying out. So I'll turn that off and maybe try a color balance. So the midtones, add some more blue to the midtones, and then to the highlights I'll go with a little bit more warmth in the yellow, and then in the shadows drop it down a bit with like a magenta and a blue adjustment. So now I'm going to do the levels, drop this down a bit, down to like, drop the shadow down, that, the highlight. Feeling a little strange about it. It doesn't feel like it's working. But I do this literally every time I work. I realized another thing that I forgot to apply to this, so I'm going to do that now. So the actual line layers, which I was talking about before, I'm going to do each one. So layer, new, layer, attach. This one is the plants down here, the little like seaweed stuff, like swamp muck, lily pads and all that. So I'm going to make that line colored, not black like that. It's more of like a green, and I'll adjust the opacity of the green on top. And then the fog in the background, so I'm going to do layer, new layer, use previous layer as clipping mask, select the fog color, fill that in. I like that a little better. I'm going to adjust the shadow on the tree branch now too, as I feel like that's a lot of the problem now, is that that is too bright. I felt like maybe it wasn't before, but I'm going to brightness contrast and turn it down, make it a little darker. Yeah, I think that helps pop her forward a bit. I'm going to adjust the shadow on pretty much everything else too as well. on the water, make it a little darker, brightness contrast. And then on the grass, image adjustment, brightness contrast. Alright. Okay, that gives it a bit more depth. But I think her skin is the only thing that's kind of messing up the rest. So let me see if I can fix that. So I'm going to adjust it just on its own. This isn't an adjustment layer. This is just adjusting it using the menu. And if I zone out here just a little bit, just working my way through the picture. So I'm so close to the end. I think the problem was that she was too bright and colorful, and she needed to be a little deader looking. Not that she can't be light and pale, but she can't be so saturated. So I'm going to take her rags and maybe turn the brightness down on those a little bit. Let's see here. I think that's where it went wrong. Was this hue saturation layer here? Okay, I'm going to turn that down a bit. And I'm going to create a new layer on top of the water, the grassy area, and the background. A new adjustment layer. Let me do the color balance. Go into the shadow. Maybe put that above the tree layer too. Okay. Alright, so on top of all of it, I'm going to go back and do the hue saturation. And then I'm going to do selective color, go to black. So what I've done is I've selected the black in the image, dragged it over into the red here, and then without adjusting the darkness of the red, it just stays red. But if I take the black section here and drag it over, I can make it really dark. So I can kind of equal it out. Let me see if I want to keep it that way though. This is literally the part that I just like kind of go crazy on. Making sure that everything's just right. So the neutrals, I'm trying to find a way to just like maybe make it slightly more blue. And then with the whites, which is all the lighter tones, make it slightly more red and yellow. So there it is, on and off. The problem could actually be the color of her shadow. It might be too close to her base tone. I'm going to brighten up the background a little bit. Or play with the tone of it just a bit, the hue and saturation. Yeah, I like that.